Welcome to the Heart of Soul podcast, an exploration of who you are, what you are, and why you are, offering new ways to investigate age-old questions at the heart of you. Hi, it's Joseph, and thanks for listening to the Heart of Soul podcast. Today's episode is a continuation of the last one on shamanism, and we address Kundalini awakenings, energetic transmissions of all kinds, and the important reasons why Sagehood and Sainthood must be distinguished from each other in order to fully realize the depths of each. Quick announcement: on June 17th, 2023, in the Clubhouse app, our friend Eric Grace will host a gathering of EBE ensoulmentors to talk about Edenity, EBE, and answer questions for participants. That will be at 10:30 Pacific time on Clubhouse in the Holy, that's with a WH, the Holy Human Club. Stace, Brie, Eric, myself, and others will be there, and when we get together, very interesting things tend to happen, so I hope you can make it. You'll find the invite in the show notes. If you can't make it and or want to email questions for us to field, you can always email me at Joseph, Josef, at clearandopen.com. Thanks so much for listening. Greetings and welcome forward to this. This is our second, I believe, Mercury retrograde edition. So we've been, for the last 5 minutes, that you've, listeners and watchers, have not been having to deal with. You've been insulated through the magic of editing and technology from the horrible retrograde experience. I had a hard drive die and completely forgot how to do the things that I typically do. And now you know that I did that and you didn't have to deal with it. So welcome. Thanks, Stace, for being here. I'm in a completely weird mood, barely capable of doing what we're doing today, but we're going to do it anyway. And yeah.
This all unfolds in the real world. And that means the real outside world and the real inside world. So
yeah,
we just surf reality.
I'm as the producer of this podcast, I want to be real about what's going on with me, and so I'm going to spend 30 seconds talking about that in the beginning of this damn thing. So I just want to briefly say before we get started today, I've been getting a lot of emails from just random listeners and watchers of the podcast, and that's been so lovely to hear from people. So if anyone has been felt shy or unsure about reaching out, I've had some lovely conversations with people. I had a number of people ask me to read Soul Species for them, which has been really fun. And it's just been cool to get to know who's out there, who's listening, what their questions are. And we are going to do guests sometime in the very near future. I just have to get my head around how to do that. And I've not been able to get my head around much this week, so I haven't gotten to it.
Well, when the heart's busy getting its essence around everything, the head takes a second seat. So yeah,
it never ceases to amaze me how many layers there are of losing how your mind typically works, and then having it re-up and re-come together in some new way. I think I said last week, I forgot, I couldn't figure out the difference between 4 and 5 and once, just trying to count something once. And I was like, really? Wow, that's a new level of demindifying. But I'm still somehow able to function despite not knowing the difference.
Well, that relates to what we ended last week with after I think we completed the podcast taping. And we talked a little bit about feeling crazy, remember? About could this paradigm really be this big? And I replied, of course, that I'm always in doubt, always looking for the black swan, in a world of white swans in terms of contradictions in the metaphysics or some unfoldment of identity that just doesn't resonate. But I had another quick thought here that relates to what you just said. Joseph had asked me in this post conversation if we'd ever felt crazy, that so many things are answerable and transmutable in this paradigm. How could that possibly be? How could that possibly be? And I had a second thought about it, and it relates to today also, and that is that it's not confirmatory, but it's evidential. that it would make sense that it can address anything transmutatively, and reasonably and soulfully, if its basic assumption was correct. In other words, the assumption that we're emotional, soulful beings first, before we're energetic beings, before we're mental beings, before we're physical beings, before we're willful beings. If a paradigm nailed the essential fiber or fabric of human consciousness, then it would semi-metalogically be able to
excellent.
Answer just about everything in ways that life-changing. Do you see?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It would be armed with the imprimatur of the essence of human consciousness, which has eluded psychology, spirituality, and philosophy all these tens of thousands of years. So in that sense, it's sort of I don't want to use the phrase left-handed affirmation of the paradigm's possible accuracy, because left was always seen as the yin, and I don't want a left-handed compliment as a diss on the sacred yin.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to add that little fold to our post podcast taping from last week, that we always have doubt, all of us in this paradigm. We're always testing it. And maybe we've stumbled on the essence of human consciousness, because it proves itself every single day when we're not looking to try to prove itself.
Yeah, right. To me, one of the most impressive things about the paradigm has always been its ability to precipitate emergent, unintentional, unplanned outcomes. Like the majority of the changes, the vast majority, I think, are not intended. And that's both the reward and the price you pay. Because
nicely put. Oh, yeah, because there's another dimension to that. And that is that not only are the consequences of the unfoldment unintended, they tend to be shattering our positive expectation of change.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, it's almost never positive. Well, 2 times out of 10, an unfoldment will be surprisingly positive. But now we circle back to what started this piece of the conversation, that it's a negative from one point of view. It's more suffering that has to be processed. Mm-hmm. But there's always, as you said here a few moments ago, there's always a meta, palpable positivity even to the suffering. Mm-hmm. So if a paradigm claims or reports that every unexpected unfoldment, unintended, was positive, I'd certainly, if that was the case in Edenity, I'd certainly be suspicious that we've got an unconscious thing going on. But when it's created to have a more palpable suffering, but with an adjoining positivity that knows you're on track for healing. So it's really interesting.
I was saying to Stace before we started recording that I've been just, my heart has felt so open I know it's been going on for a while, but there are waves and waves of it the last few months, but especially the last few weeks, that it just feels so open that it hurts just to exist. And I can feel the green part of me, what do we call that these days? Not the shadow, not the ego.
Emotively inauthentic.
Yes, that's green is shorthand for that again. And I can feel it's like, this is what you wanted? Okay, so you're feeling more. Why would you want this? And of course, we all want to feel the good feelings more, love and joy and, the good feelings. But on the way to that, you have to feel in this case, I think it's just like a existential trepidation. It's like a mix of fear and sorrow and rawness, and like there's a deeper me that knows like this is all really good, but it's extremely uncomfortable, and the dreams I have are awful these days, and I wake up way too early, and it's all really unpleasant, but somehow I experience it as meta good.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and the other dimension to that, if I might offer, from most of us who would report such a denouement of any particular arc of growth, and that is that a lot of times this rawness has not been available to earthen incarnation for thousands of years. That Edenity, for people who've worked the longest, will unearth things that were never healable in past lives because we never had the essence of human consciousness diagnosed and a dharma based on that diagnosis ever before.
Yeah.
So all these lifetimes that all of us have had, hundreds and hundreds, had issues that never were healable until the diagnosis of the essence of human consciousness became available. So what Joseph is speaking to here, and I want to honor that, that aspect that feels so raw and porous that it's even difficult just to exist, hasn't been sucking earth oxygen for about 1,500 years, or 1,200 years. So that's going to be onerous. All of a sudden, that soulful aspect is now abiding at the level of the human in human consciousness, and it's awful. That awful feeling had to be suppressed to carry on and learn and keep learning what it means to be a human being having, or a spiritual being having human experience.
And related to that, let me jump on that for a second. Related to that, I noticed myself going sort of in and out of my local personality, in willfully intending my way through the day. And when I mean willfully, sometimes it's just as simple as like, here's the 4 things I want to do today. And some days that happens. Usually it's a mix of I can do that and I can't. And some days it's like I am having more and more the experience of what I do in a day is not my decision at all. And some days that feels very much like a struggle. Other days it feels like play, like, oh, I wonder where I'll be guided to today. Exactly. And some days it's horribly depressing that I'm not in control of that. And that would, of course, be control, having that experience. And other times it's lovely. And so and then, of course, all of the feelings about all of that are just getting washed out, like, oh, this is lovely. Look, I'm on the journey of life and the divine is here and guiding me to do certain things. And other times it's just like, well, who am I and what say do I get to have in what I do today? It's a lot.
Wow.
But it all feels really positive, and I didn't intend for any of this to happen.
Well, I just heard some voice out there in the podcast land. It's one of the listeners, and this could be my own projection, but it feels like there's someone out there going, well, you could what's the term in philosophy, where your conclusions support your positive conclusions support your erroneous assumptions. It's called
begging the question.
Confirmation bias.
Yeah.
Somebody's thinking, well, what you're saying about this could all be confirmation bias because you're interpreting the unfolding positives as positive because you believe you've uncovered the essence of human consciousness.
Yeah.
And I applaud that. That's a reasonable question. If I didn't know much about Edenity, I'd certainly think of that. So all we can say at some point, as the old Zen masters used to say, all they can do is point at the moon. They can't. You can't know what this paradigm really involves until you walk a bunch of miles with it across the desert of our dreams not manifesting as human all these millennia, mostly.
And I've been talking with my lady a lot about this, related to people doing this work or not, and when it gets hard and what do they do, and EBE, I think it really is crazy. Like, it really is crazy. It's just the reason to do it for anybody is because you see everything else is far crazier.
Yeah, that's
really what it comes down to. You don't do it because it's some known, non-experimental entity where that's going to get you exactly where you want to go. You do it because everything else looks completely idiotic to you, and you've tried it or seen through everything else.
Right.
And then you're just left with this, and it's the only thing that really makes sense after you see through everything else. And
and that's the bane. That's the bane and the benefit, right? So, yeah. And that leads right into our completion of our topic about
Yes.
shamanism, actually,
Okay.
because let's start with the thing called Diksha, uh,
Mm.
which was really zooming across the world back in the late 80s and 90s and early 2000s. Started by a person in India
Kalki
who
was his name, I believe.
I think you're right. Either he or one of his first lieutenants or next level down to spread this around the world, this Diksha thing, uh, said that the Earth is a toilet, and the only real sane thing to do is to get out of here as soon as possible, something to that effect. And so that's all we need. There is their paradigmatic assumption for Diksha. I'll
Yeah.
give you a quick personal story on it. I didn't hear much. I heard the term, but I once went for a haircut uh,
Oh,
in,
I remember
in
those.
in Ashland, Oregon. I think it was, yeah, it wasn't. It was in Ashland, and because I was 15 years there. Yeah, um, and the guy's cutting my hair, and uh, I felt something weird while he was using the scissors, and as he washed or before that, even washing my hair, I felt something weird. And then as he was cutting my hair, he would stop for a moment and then smooth out the hair with his hand, and then he'd switch over and do the other hand. And once in a while, he'd put both down and then put his hands on my head and kind of ruffle the hair as if he needs to do that to move to the next thing. I didn't. I had a little bit more hair than I had now, uh, but and then I started to get a headache, I had to stop him. What are you what are you doing something here? And oh,
Hmm.
oh, you noticed? Wow, that's really good news. Wow, yeah, I'm giving you Diksha. And I said,
Oh.
you're giving me what? He said, "Well, it's an enlightenment thing, and I got enlightened by it, and I'm going to get you enlightened. I'm doing it with all my customers." And I said, do you getting permission for people to? Oh no, why would I? Well, we all want to get the hell out of here, right? It's enlightenment. That means we don't have to come back here anymore because there's. And I said, well, real enlightenment says there's nothing to return anyway. There's nothing to reincarnate anyway. And he said, and here was this. He looked at me and said, what? I mean, it's just so crazy how Westerners get so duped into this stuff. At any rate, I was able to clear it out. I folded the haircut and I said, I'll take over from here,
Mm.
and then started preaching the negativities of Diksha to anyone who would listen at that point, because it's the scary part about it was that it was and still is semi effective in doing
Hmm.
something,
Yeah.
but it's a one size fits all to all the levels of consciousness. They have no clue about the difference between soul species, soul age, psychological programming, conditioning. All these things make the delivery of this zap of energetics something that can be very toxic for people. I've known people who had over 50 or 100 dikshas.
Hmm.
And we had to even develop a protocol for those to try to help people recover from that many dikshas, because the person who had over 100, it fried his motherboard, his chakra body motherboard. And this person couldn't anymore after that access any wound based things that of any consequence, because he was crippled by his over 100 dikshas. So he may think that he's growing, but that many dikshas. When two of us separately looked at his chakra wire motherboard, and it was fried.
It
So
floats, if I remember right, it floats people off of their bottom three chakras in a really kind of um, like when they fuse people's vertebra.
yeah,
Um,
oh yeah, right. Oh, good point. That's a good
it like
metaphor.
creates
Yeah,
an energetic structure that's really
it
hard to
does.
undo.
Because there's a dark side to this person. Just because he came from India doesn't mean there isn't darkness
Oh,
in
you mean
these
the Indians are
semi.
not all like just perfect and enlightened and sweet and loving, and that's not just part of the culture?
Well, that's too many times the picture of the gullible West. That's
Yeah.
for sure. So at any rate, Diksha is just about one of the most toxic things out there, and it made its way around the world, and a lot of people were paying a lot of money, $5,000 for a single Diksha. I heard from someone, or 3,000
I
or
think it came
5,000.
in packages, and people would go there
Yeah,
and live there and get a bunch
right,
of them.
right.
And yeah,
Anything is a shortcut to quote unquote enlightenment. And this is not even real enlightenment. It was much more of a oneness kind of
right.
enlightenment, not a non-dual kind of enlightenment. So already it's not what the Buddha taught or what ancient Advaita Vedanta teaches.
But how did Shakti transmissions actually work? Because Diksha is not the only one. The idea that you could transmit consciousness into someone in that way is an old idea, an old practice.
Yeah, or at least a segment, sort of like the same thing with gene editing. It's a good metaphor. They
Mm.
can splice out a segment of your DNA and futz with it, treat it with some chemicals and irradiation and stuff. And so it's like that. There's a piece of consciousness that you can graft onto other people if the person has the gift of transmissibility of this kind of
Well,
consciousness.
I'm gonna out you here about something that maybe you haven't thought of in a
Okay.
long time.
Okay.
Back in the day when we were living in Ashland, you had this special trick that you could do I remember you did it at least twice with me, where we'd be hanging out drinking because we were fans of wine, and you could make me sober.
Oh yeah. Right. Yes.
So, and there was one time you said, I don't know, I had probably had 4 or 5 glasses of wine, and you just looked in my eyes, and you said, I remember you saying something like, "I can make you sober if you want. It'll only last like a minute or two." And you looked in my eyes, and something happened, and it actually worked. And then there was
Yeah.
another time that was even more memorable, where we were at that Italian place near the plaza that's probably not there anymore.
Oh, I know which one you mean.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it turned
Yeah.
into a Greek place and probably
Yes.
changed
Right.
again
Right.
since then. And
Right.
it was a big group of us, and I was drinking and drinking and drinking. And I'm like, boy, I'm drinking a lot of wine, and it's really good, and it's not like affecting me at all. I said out loud, and then I saw out of the corner of my eye you were just kind of smirking. And I remember saying, "Are you doing something?" And you were like, "Me," And then you left a little on earlier than the rest of us, and like 3 4 minutes after you left, I was wasted. It all caught up with me. So somehow I get the sense that this somehow relates to this domain of Shakti transmissions, because you can do this kind of stuff. So I want
Yeah.
to hear how it works and what it is.
Well, um, first of all, you've got to take advantage of someone who trusts you.
For sure. I did and do.
And I don't, and whenever I've done it, I've only done it with a few people, and you're one of the few, literally. I sometimes make jokes with, say, would you like me to take the calories out of your wine?
Uh-huh.
Sometimes, but there's a way of with love, not with any sort of dark motive, conscious or unconscious, just a fun little thing that doesn't last very long, as opposed to doing Diksha, which tends to be a permanent etching, or one that takes a while to work through if you're otherwise healthy.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know how to describe it. It's a third eye implant. Is the best way to say it. It's like a little temporary. It's like think of a pill you take that has a time release coating around it. It's a very short-lived kind of third eye implant kind of thing for fun that has nothing to do with any central issue of the person. It's just funny to play with the nervous system that way.
But
And
how
so
did you learn to do that? When did you
I,
discover you could do that?
I just knew I could.
Uh-huh.
And I tested it on 3 or 4 people over the years. You most of all, because you were the most fun to do that
And
with.
here's another example. I get to reveal fun things from Stace's past. When we would play Ligretto, the kids card game, you would sometimes energetically intervene and cause people to win or lose. I remember you never made me win. I always wanted, because you were working against my natural greens competitive nature. But I saw you make other people win, and they were just on fire. And you did once make me lose, and it was like, it was like I was drugged. I was like so confused, and I felt so slow. And it was all in good fun, but still, like,
yeah. And I would, I feel a little sheepish that you've outed me here because I wouldn't do that again. I wouldn't do that anymore. Those were the days where I was playing and it was harmless, but it's still not right to do. And so,
That was
but
funny as hell.
it was, but again, it's just about it's like you can jam radar,
Yeah.
with a certain frequency. So that's all I was doing was jamming or supporting, enhancing someone's consciousness or impeding it just a little bit, just bending the light slightly so it prisms.
And I get now, because I have this experience with my girlfriend, because she's very open to me and very energetically sensitive, and I can kind of do things like that with her. So the no victimhood rule applies. The person has to be letting you in. So
Yes,
you're not really doing something to them. You're just
no,
sort of
no,
riding
no.
how they already let you in and
Sure,
playing a
but
game.
and it was, yeah, and it was all in good fun. And I was liberal with, I never used it to win for myself.
No, no, you never did that.
I
Yeah.
never did that. It was not self-oriented. It was just sort of uh, seeing what I could do and couldn't do by jamming radar or enhancing radar.
But
So
it's the
I
same
just,
but it's the same kind of thing that
yeah,
transmissions are doing. It's a third eye mediated energetic
yes, yeah.
activity.
Yeah, it's translated shamanically through the hands for most people. Shakti is mostly, but it can also be transmitted without the hands if it's a powerful transmitter. But again, when I said I only did it with people who trusted me, that's pejorative in a couple of different ways because you could say I took advantage of that, but it was sort of like how really good friends play gags and
Yeah.
jokes on each other. So it was completely harmless that way. But I was learning also myself that was possible to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so the motive for doing it has to be really 100% above board. And I would never do it again without permission. But
Mm-hmm.
at least it was in jovial context and fun. But
Oh, it's
these
so
kinds of
fun.
things, I was learning myself about what could and couldn't be done. And I thought this would be a harmless, fun way to do it. But no one never noticed except you.
I tended to notice more often. Yeah.
Oh yeah, because your antennas are so finely honed.
Yeah. I
So
would just
I
get like,
think,
something is going on here. Why do I feel like I have tunnel vision suddenly or need glasses?
yeah. Well, but see, back to the point. Thanks. That was fun, and I'm
Yeah.
glad I had a chance to apologize. In effect, here, I would never do that again.
Mm.
But still, when I said a person has to trust you, that whole trust thing is completely is not in play when people do diksha unknowingly. They don't tell you what you're doing. I didn't tell anyone, but I wasn't trying to make them enlightened. I was just trying to play some fun with rolling the dice. I used to have a little bit of ability to change the way dice roll. It's
Oh.
just a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
what do they call that? Psychopathy or something. I used
Telekinesis.
Telekinesis.
Yeah.
Yeah, I made a penny move once about 3 centimeters when I was exhausted afterward. It was just that's just fool's gold. That's just I was a young kid and I didn't know what the hell was up at the time. But these kind of downside, there's this kind of activity is completely surreptitious and for this hair cutter, for example. And I found out later through hearsay that this happens a lot with people who are in the helping professions. Massage therapists were doing it
Oh,
without
yeah.
the knowing it. And so it's one thing to try to fool someone into enlightenment, but you're playing with fire here because
Mm-hmm.
these can affect the way the neurons talk to each other in the central nervous system. And that's the downside of it.
Mm-hmm.
Mine were time release, very quick to go away. Like when I left the restaurant that day, then I was no longer broadcasting in that jamming frequency, so you didn't get drunk.
Yeah, that was one of the most memorable and hilarious ones.
Yeah,
Yeah. It
yeah.
was, the rug had
And
been
I
pulled out.
and I have to be, honest too. When you have these kinds of gifts, you really have to learn what's right to do and what's not right to do,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a lot of people who do this kind of stuff that have unconsciously wound-based motives. And maybe my fun stuff at the time had some unconscious wounds to it. I can't say yes or no to that, but I would never say no. Of course, there wasn't.
Well,
But
yeah, and I know from, I've never tried to sober someone up or influence a game like that. I've never tried to do that. I probably would be fun to play around with, but my third eye is somewhat open, and there have been definitely times where I've been in, like, it always happens to me in grocery stores. I'm looking for the pickles or whatever, and someone walks by me, and I'm like, oh, that person had sexual abuse, and it's like, whoa, I don't want to know that. Like,
right.
was some part of me reading that out? And I know people with open third eyes, because it's an innie sixth chakra thing.
Right.
There's a certain responsibility that comes with not looking. But
Yes.
if there's not a wholly if there's not an ownership of the gift, then it starts to kind of operate independently or unconsciously, and that can be invasive.
Yes. Oh, that's a great way to put it. If you're not aware that these things are coming into you because it became so normalized, maybe in your childhood, you don't even know it's happening. It leaves room for our unconscious wounding, which, remember, is about 2/3 by default of our whole consciousness storage, unconscious storage. Conscious storage, unconscious storage, sorry. So that's exactly right. So the third eye is an innie. It's not a spotlight that you look through the darkness with and identify things. Things just come, and you can learn to adjust by kind of, I'm not going to pay attention to what I'm getting right now. You can do that, but that's about as much you can do when you have a really profound gift like I do and you do and Brie.
I remember I'd only known you for 2 or 3 years, and something happened. I think I talked about this in a previous podcast, but something happened, and suddenly I started seeing discarnate spirits, which I'd never seen before. And it was, in one way, it was like I still knew the difference between people and souls in bodies and souls not in bodies. I knew the difference, but it was really distracting because the difference was not as much as it should have been.
Oh,
it took me kind of a week to, stop looking, to sort of direct the radar toward the people in bodies and not see the people not in bodies, because there's 10 times as many of them as there are us, and it's really distracting.
Yeah, especially. Yeah, go ahead.
That's why I find those ghost hunter shows so funny. Like, they're looking for ghosts, and like looking for the top
machines.
5.
With their machines, and that's fine. Those machines can sometimes pick up perturbations in the energy field, but you can't beat natural third eye to see this stuff. So
it does take a discipline. And then in the case of these Diksha and Shakti transmission things, there's usually an unconscious wound-based motive that is operating there, where the people are not taking responsibility for their third eye gifts, and as evidenced by a hairdresser doing it to people, or a massage therapist doing it to people who haven't even asked, which is unconscionable.
Yeah, unconscionable is the right word. So that's as much airtime as I want to give to Diksha.
Yeah.
It's a steaming pile of Schweinescheiße when it's ill-advised, coming from a paradigm that thinks Earth is a toilet. And when the real truth of earthen existence is that it's also an equal real estate of divine being as any other subtle dimension. This heavily gravitational and edgedly dense universe, especially in Earth here, that's part of divine real estate also. And so there's nothing to escape from. And that's what leads us right into Kundalini here. It's really an interesting topic, Kundalini, because you'll hear that term bandied about, and I've known personally a few people who all tell the same story, that they feel something rising from their first chakra, moving upwards through their central canal in some way, and opening and blossoming the chakral pinwheels that are on the front and the back of each chakral structure, until it reaches 6 and then 7, and then they have some sort of event, And when that happens, then they're enlightened in some manner. I know one woman here locally where Brie and I live, who has gone on to become a world famous author, and she had a Kundalini type experience.
Mm-hmm.
But whenever I look at Kundalini, and I knew her, so I was able to look at her field, and oh, that's what's going on, and that told me when I looked in the Akashika what is actually going on with Kundalini. And so Kundalini is all energy based. It's all energy based. And as if you've been listening to 53 previous podcasts or 54, you'll know Identity's take on that thing. It's for younger souls, and that's fine that it's for younger souls. It's sort of like an introduction to how everything is connected. And so they will feel this kind of rising kundalini or snake up through their central canal, top going out 7. But this is not a non-dual enlightenment. This is more of what we would call an allness. We don't use the term oneness in this paradigm, allness. It's a much more accurate term for how things are all connected. But oneness implies a couple of different things that metaphysically are pretty on shifting sand. Oneness, to be able to name oneness, you still have to be there experiencing oneness. So this is not non-dual enlightenment.
It's at least two-ness then, because
it's at least two-ness.
There's no you there experiencing it, in which case that would make it a non-dual enlightenment, not a oneness.
Correct. Yeah. And so this is an energetic way to access how everything is connected in allness, and that's fine. And that alone, on a planet that's 75% young souls and Terran souls, that's going to really knock the socks off, make you different than 70% or 2/3 of the planet's consciousness. So you can make a lot of money, and I'm not running down the money. That's fine. You can, but you're serving up to a much larger demographic than Identity can serve. And that's fine. That's fine. It helps people start the road to maybe spiritual transformations. But there's no personal dynamics to heal to be able to do this. A lot of people will experience this as a trigger of some sort and weren't even intending for the thing to happen. Others try a lot of years to try to activate the chakras in certain ways, breathing and toning and sounding and these kinds of things. But it's mostly for younger souls for an allness kind of experience, which is not, we're not running it down, but we just want to make the distinction between what Identity calls sainthood and sagehood, which is sort of the way I want to end up closing the circle on shamanism. Is that we really break out sagehood as pure scorched earth non-duality, the kind that non-dual gurus or teachers have to temper to be able to talk normally with people. They don't do scorched earth kinds of non-duality. Some do. What's his name? The guy from Massachusetts?
Andrew Cohen.
Andrew Cohen, who one time one of his followers hurt him, so he had his room at the ashram painted red to show the blood that Andrew felt in being hurt by this follower, which is just too many ways to talk about how toxic that such a thing is in a bunch of different directions. So in that sense, sagehood is pure scorched earth non-duality, and sainthood involves what we're talking about, these 2 podcasts. Third eye gifts, dynamicals of bandwidths of dimensions into the subtle world where other discarnate souls are able to be seen and channeled or listened to or get messages with. That's all part of sainthood because there's some relationality between you and the reality of realities that you're swimming in at that moment. There's a duality, even if it's a thinned out duality, there's still an experiencer and an experience. Whereas scorched earth, there's no experiencer, only experience.
Because on the way to non-dual awakening, you run into allness.
Yes, correct.
If usually, if
Usually.
it's not broken out and seen that that's actually a sainthood function, then you might
Yes.
stop there.
Yes, exactly
So,
right.
and
Yes.
tell me if this is right about myself, because I think it's a decent example. My level or my awakening attainments or whatever include what we would call isness to some decent degree, and
Yes.
allness to some decent degree. And I
Uh-huh.
know I'm about ankle to knee deep in notness, the last phase. That's the scorched earth territory. But I
It's
know
above the knees.
above
Just
the
so,
knees.
yeah, it's above
Wait,
the knees.
I don't know what I don't know.
Yes, right.
But I know when I get whiffs of it in myself, and I still end up there sometimes. There's still this heavy, dreadful fear that comes up that tells me I'm not done with that.
Yeah.
But if I were merging saint and sagehood together, I might just
Right.
live in isness and allness and be like, oh, I guess I'm awake and I'm all
Yes.
done. Because, oh man, that notness stuff, I mean, it makes me nauseated just to even feel into it. It's still this awful
Yeah.
place. And when you have the sparkly, fun isness and allness stuff, why would you, only a maniac would steer themselves into notness?
Yeah. In that sense, that level of enlight, what they call enlightenment's an artifact of not being able to distinguish between scorched earth non-duality and allness,
Mm-hmm.
slash oneness, which it hurts my mouth to say oneness. I just it's difficult for me.
Yeah,
So
it's
in
metaphysically
that
sloppy.
Yeah, so in that sense, shamanism, this whole topic is a subdimension of sainthood, not sagehood. And Kundalini makes this exact error, this artifact. But teenage souls make these kinds of not make these kinds of distinctions for maybe 100, 150 lifetimes. That's okay. We're just trying to serve a demographic that hasn't been serviceable until now, one that required for a certain demographic the actual accurate and clinically tested essence of human consciousness definition upon which the whole paradigm pivots. So, in that sense, I want to talk a little bit about chakras and how they work and how they've been changed since 2012 also.
Hmm.
So in this sense, not surprisingly, Identity has some pretty strong opinions about chakras that overlaps somewhat with the ancient Hindu teachings, but departs radically also. And the first one, of course, to say is something that you and your beloved and I all got around interestingly.
I know I still will never forget that moment where we
Yeah,
did that podcast on it, and I said,
yeah.
"You're never going to believe what Stace said about chakras. That there's actually only 6 chakras." She's like, "Oh yeah, you mean 1 and 7?" And I was like, "What?" She's like, "Yeah, that's always how it's looked to me. I just never said it." Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so let's. I have a wonderful little chart. Did I sent you that chart? Didn't I?
I think so.
I think so. I could put it up to the camera, but I won't. It's too.
Well,
You
I
need to
can, when I
look
do
at
the
it.
editing, I'll make that appear right now.
Oh,
I can
oh,
do
all right,
that.
great. Oh,
Yep.
thanks.
Hmm.
And that is that the what I'm not really sure. I'm still going back and forth because one day I get one answer and one day I get another answer. But um, uh, Identity maintains that there's only 6 chakral structures: the front and back of 2, the front and back of 3, the front and back of 4, the front and back of 5, and the front and back of 6. That's 4. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, that's 5. Sorry. That's 5 chakral structures horizontally oriented. And the 6th chakral structure is the 1 and 7 vertical one. So there's only 6 chakral structures, but with those 6, there's 12 chakral pinwheels, 2 on each of the 5 horizontal chakral structures and 2 on the vertical one.
Mm-hmm.
So that's 12. And actually you could, if you walked around with them all, you'd have 12 chakral pinwheels, but only 6 chakral structures. And these chakral structures are moved from across from the front to the back. There's a front and back to 2, a front and back to 3, front and back from 4, 5, and 6. And 2, 4, and 6, of course, in Edenity's picture are yin-based chakral structures, and 1 and 7, 1, 3, 5, and 7 are yang-based. And so, in that sense, you could say there's 7 chakral pinwheels if you don't count the back ones. But that's where people mistook it. Well, there's 7 chakral pinwheels, so there's 7 chakras. No, you see what I mean? There's only 6 chakral structures.
Oh, I get it.
Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So, in that sense, what a Kundalini, well, let's say Edenity's picture, Edenity offers that, and this is where I'm not sure when it started, but the chakral structure 4, which is an innie from the front and the back. In the back, you have your soul territory, and your front, you have your human territory. And when your chakra 4 in the front is open, you're vulnerable to the human experience. And when it's open in the back, which they're always open, it's just a matter of how they're functioning optimally or not, you're going to get soul information. So a lot of times, if you want to get some soul information infused into your consciousness, you can breathe in the rear of 4, breathe out 5, which is the personal will, breathe in the rear of 6, which is soul-based information of third eye, and then breathe out 7. What that will do is induce soul territory, soul stuff forward into your human being. Now, it's a little bit complex what I just said here, but I want to offer that just as a small taste for what we call chakral breathing or chakral yoga. As somebody called it. This sounds like chakra yoga. Well, I never thought of doing that because yoga is a lot overrated in Edenity's opinion. It's not unhelpful, but it certainly serves a self-image way more than transcendence in that
when people
sense.
Make it into a spiritual paradigm. Anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So at any rate, when you chakra 4, here's the difference in chakra flows. Edenity offers that chakra 4 from front and back enters to the central canal, and half goes down as into 1, the earth, and half goes up to the heavens, quote unquote, out 7. In other words, younger souls who experience Kundalini and say, oh, well, it started in 1 and all the way up, that's possible to have that quasi experience because they've not yet been taught or learned how to integrate earthen experience with spirit experience. All they've been teaching everywhere in all the religions, Western religions and the Eastern ones, it's all about getting the hell out of the human, because the human is always defined as the impediment to some sort of spiritual liberation. It's either the house of the devil, your mind is and your will, personal will, is the house of the devil in Western religion, and it's the human is the house of the illusion in the ego. And all of it means anything that's human has to be transcended to get to some spiritual real estate, which is now, has always been, and will always be an artifact and a nonsensical dynamic. It's just it's all based on transcendence of energy to escape the planet. And who can blame? We were younger souls.
Well, and what just also hit me is how that fits with the survival phase of human existence. It's like when in a survival mode, being here is really hard. So you want a vacation from it.
Right.
And
Exactly.
so your spiritual practice is about getting little vacations from it. And somebody then says, well, you can sort of not be here permanently. Ooh, that sounds great. But it doesn't actually work.
No, and what I love about your use of the word vacation is the root of it is vacate.
Yes.
Vacate. You vacate the human. And that's an unwholeness. I don't know how else to say it. You can't unwhole your way to wholeness. You just can't. And yet every Eastern and quasi-Western Eastern hybrid is based on this nonsense that you can get to wholeness by unwholeness.
Yeah, either by realizing that there is no essential self, or through
Right,
altruism and selflessness, which is basically the same thing, only different.
right.
Yeah.
Or raise your vibrations to no longer be trapped by Maya
Yeah.
in terms of allness or oneness.
Yeah.
There's 3 or 4 different versions of that. The whole, to get to wholeness, you have to work wholeness steps. And the planet never really wasn't mature enough emoto spiritually to be ready to realize that there's a way in the end to make the human experience and earth and gravitational density part of divinity also, which a lot of these paradigms will say, but then let's get out of here, even though it's part of divinity. Wait, what? What? Why would you want to get out of it if you're defining it's part of divine being? Oh, because it's a gross end of it. It's no, it's either all of divinity everywhere or it's not divinity at all. You can't cut up or segment divine being. So you have to holify your way to wholeness, which means, sorry, folks, the personal is just as spiritual as any other aspect of our consciousness bandwidths. And that means connect to earth. And that means spiritualizing your human, not transcending it, spiritualizing it. And the only way to spiritualize the human, that's what I invented this EBE stuff, this emotional body ensoulment, is that's the only way. Technically, an atheist can do EBE because it's just about, it's a super psychology, you could say. It's a soul-based psychology that allows you to make peace with your first chakra. And so, what you said a few moments ago in the non-dual domain, Joseph, is when people have sudden enlightenments like Gangaji did with Papaji, just sitting at a table with them one day, there she went. Shakti field, or whatever way she wanted to describe it. But there was no lurking terror of disappearance or not being that you report, and that's actually the proof that you're onto the real non-dual, which is why. Go ahead.
Now, yeah. I studied with Adyashanti quite a lot, and enough to hear him say, because he's said a lot of things and doesn't often repeat them necessarily. And I heard him say once, speak exactly to the fear. I don't think he wouldn't call it the fear of not being, but he spoke to it, and he said some people go through that and some people don't.
Right.
And that was all he said about it. But correct me if I'm wrong, we would say the people who experience the fear of not being, they're actually healthily processing that fear, leading to an authentic enlightenment. And the people who don't feel it are transcending, at least to some significant degree.
I would say to enough of a degree to close off the door to the personal being spiritual.
Yeah. And right? So super fascinating that of course, as he's not a pure Zen teacher, but he's in the neighborhood, that they wouldn't make a psychological or emotional wound based distinction like that.
No.
Because they just say, well, everybody's is a little different. And they don't seem to care about the metaphysics. Well, why would one person feel that and one not? That seems really important,
Only to the ego, they would say.
Right.
You see, you can never argue or debate these folks when they feel like they're in the hands of ultimate truth. Yeah. We're testing what might be a universal truth about the essence of human consciousness. We never would say there's anything absolutely known. So the ego has been the boogeyman for just about every spiritual teaching, religious or otherwise, since the dawn of time. Get the hell out of here, transcend. And Kundalini, for example, is an easy version of an early version of that. So that's exactly what Edenity would say. You're exactly correct that if you haven't felt the terror, these are an existential terror of not being, and the terror of being, the terror of not being, and the terror of non-being underlay the 3 dharmas of personhood, sagehood, and sainthood in opposite order there for Edenity. So in that sense, folks, I'm sorry, the flow in 1 and 7 isn't just up. If it's just up for you only, and that's all you ever experience, congratulations, you're a young soul. Keep at it, stick with it. Don't listen to what we're saying. Stick with your own truth until later on you dead end in it. But Edenity offers the end game for all of us is to holify our way to wholeness. And that means redeeming the personal. And that personal is emoto soulful. By definition, nothing is outside of divine being. Nothing, not the earth, nothing. So that means you have to go the other way to find spirit in the human. You have to go down 1 to anchor your holiness with an H in WH wholeness by learning how to process the terror of being, which helps you anchor 1. And on the sagehood side, process the terror of not being, which opens up 7. And then finally, the terror of non-being and sainthood, which is adjudicating your personal will with the will of divine being for your life. So these kinds of metaphysical distinctions are at the core of all of our offered opinions. No dogma allowed here. So in that sense, if that one chart that you're going to graft onto the podcast, that says it all. If you'll notice, at the junction of 4, the chakral structure 4 and chakral structure 1 and 7, you will see that the flow goes downward to 1, bifurcates, and upward to 7. And it only doesn't do that if you're a younger soul or a teenage soul onto spiritual transcendence and energy instead of emotal soulfulness.
And there's a key distinction right here related to how EBE is working with the soul rather than psychologically with the mind.
Yes.
Just when you talked about just a minute ago about the sainthood, enlightenment, the healing the terror of non-being. I've been experiencing that recently without doing any sainthood work at all, which is, again, it's like, I thought I was doing EBE right now, working with my control, and now I'm dealing with my inability to plan my day and stuff coming up around that. It is, again, another example of an emergent outcome of not only do the outcomes surprise us, but sometimes you end up actually working on fears you had no intention to be working on. They just come up.
Exactly. And that's a good point to make here that we haven't made before, Joseph. Thanks. And that is, if a soul, and Joseph qualifies, has many past lives of both saintly kinds of enlightenments and sagely kinds of enlightenments, there's never been any sort of personhood enlightenments because the personal was never deemed spiritual by East or West or real. So a lot of us have had sage and saint kind of enlightenments. If you have those in your soul field, that's in your soul field. So when you start doing EBE, which is the new thing that's never been available before now, that we're emotive beings before we're anything else, it's a soul-based psychology. And it doesn't result in the best that's out there, a la Maslow, where we self-actualize. That's an energetic self-actualization. That's the top of the heap so far until someone comes along psychologically and redefines that for Maslow. But we've always maintained that Edenity brings you to emotive self-authentication, not energetic self-actualization. You can be full of self-actualized stuff and still have a ton of unconscious wounding in the existential unconscious. So that's self-actualization is basically you can pay your taxes. You're a good person. You wish the well for most people, and you don't necessarily rob the corner 7-Eleven very often. So
not very often anyway.
So you qualify for self-actualization by just being a functionally good human being. But self-authentication, emoto, soulful self-authentication, that's a whole other beast. And those, as you qualify for, having sage and saint enlightenments in your past lives, working your personhood is going to uncover those like gas above an oil field,
Yeah.
methane above an oil field. These things will show up and you're not even looking for them because your past life, um, saintly and sagely enlightenments never had a human grounding. They were all based in transcendence or devil fears or whatever in the past. So that's why EBE is so critical, a pivot in our human evolutionary arc, I would offer as humans, because it finally soulifies and divinifies our human.
That to me is one of the most compelling things about EBE, and again is one of those rewards and a price. When I started many years ago, I was quite an unspiritual person, and it was through. I thought I was working on my this life emotional stuff, and I just fell into, oh, it turns out I have all sorts of spiritual gifts, and I'm a radically different person. I mean, I remember in the moment, for example, just being, I don't know, 6 or 9 months into EBE, and I really didn't like children. I still don't like children. I still don't want to have them, but I had like a visceral, like, ugh. And I remember I was at this restaurant in Sonoma County, and I saw this baby on the other side of the glass. I think they were outside on the patio, and we were inside. And I looked in this baby's eyes, and I just started crying. And I'd never had that. I just saw the beauty of this baby, and I'd never had a reaction like that ever before. And that was a completely different me. And I didn't sign up for EBE because I wanted to like children, and I and I still don't want to have them. But it's like, it changes you, as I think I've said before. You used to say you become a different person who happens to be you, and you don't get to plan or decide who that is.
No, if everything goes to a prearranged expectation, if you keep hitting prearranged expectations, I promise you're in delusion land. It's real change requires chaos, requires disruption, and this is a hard sell. They talk about in modern memes, got to be disruptive to change things, and that is such that's like skipping stones on a still lake as opposed to deep sea fishing, in terms of wholeness and authenticity. Disruption and chaos is what life is, and we're only conditioned to control over or pave over that inherent chaos. There are people after an earthquake who become psychotic because all of a sudden they saw the earth move and buildings collapse, and that prearranged picture that tomorrow is going to look like today is shattered into psychosis. Some of them never recover. So we're only conditioned into this false idea of continuity and expectation becoming the next moment, what you expected in the last moment.
Yeah, and it's so true about death too. The way people react to death. I've been watching the HBO show Succession. Have you watched any of that?
A bit.
Yeah, I find it absolutely fascinating, as I do all films. It reminds me of 6 Feet Under from years and years ago with dysfunctional families. But spoiler alert, I won't say who. Someone dies, and like the kids they're all freaking out. Like the guy was old. He was old. Like, they're all just like so upset and in denial. Like have you not prepared in any way, shape, or form the inevitability of death? Like everyone's going to die. And when the person dies and the people just fall apart, it always has blown my mind. Like, okay, if it's sudden, that's one thing. But if the person's, 80 plus years old, like, why are you so surprised? Why is this so upsetting to you?
Right.
It's upsetting to control that, like, somehow managed to have some picture that even though they know intellectually that the person's going to die at some point, they can't actually accept that into an emotive way of processing reality.
Oh, and that's the key, that last phrase. I think that was a participial phrase, if I remember my parsing.
I wouldn't know.
It's not what you know in the head is not emotively inhabited, emoto-soulfully inhabited as reality. Yeah. And then you're blindsided by your emotional reaction of the chaos that was always there.
Yeah.
The chaos doesn't just erupt because you change your consciousness. The chaos is always there. It's part of what the Buddha meant when he said life is suffering. we have been trained and conditioned to manage the chaos and unpredictability of life. And then because in the modern day, we live in homes that are sealed hermetically in some way and protected against the elements. There's an adequate food supply for about 65% of us on the planet, not for the remaining 35 still, which is a crime against spirit and humanity.
Yeah.
But chaos and disruption is the name of the game. So what we can say about Edenity is it will disrupt your life, which is why it's not for the faint-hearted or the young and sold. It will change your life from the inside out, and there's bragging rights to that.
Yeah, sure.
You see what I mean? Even though as horrific as that is to go through sometimes.
Well, and it did give us an ability to see through, as you know, as plenty of people outside Identity did, the pandemic. I was just thinking about, I remember I was getting my tires rotated at Costco like the week, I mean, you know, it was like March, whatever, 10th, 2020. And, you know, things were starting to sort of build. And I remember seeing people lined up outside the tire place. I was like, what are all these people doing here? Because the main entrance was, you know, 200 feet away. And the Costco line had formed in this, you know, ginormous, unholy mess because people were, and I saw this woman, I will never forget it, with a shopping cart, you know, scurrying away from Costco. And all she had in that cart was toilet paper. That's all she'd gone to Costco for, to get the toilet paper that somehow became this symbol of predictability and stability, and I'll have a roll of toilet paper tomorrow. And there was no rational explanation for why people were hoarding toilet paper, just because they were afraid. Because suddenly there was something that was going on that was different.
Yeah, maybe we could, you know, because we're kind of closing the chapter on shamanism, maybe we can talk about Identity's take on COVID, and that'll lead us into next time. Lead us right into current events in some ways.
Yeah, I would love to do that, because you know, just as of last week, the the World Health Organization declared it over. So it seemed to me it was over like 6 months ago, but they said it's over. So now it really is over, apparently.
Yeah, and we finally got enough antibodies in the population through the jab, which, by the way, the antibodies go away after 6 to 8 months on every single one of those jabs. The only ones that are lasting are people who get it and recover without long COVID. And Brie and I both caught it that way. On the way, believe it or not, to visit Joseph and his beloved.
And that's how I got it.
Yeah. And so we never got the jabs, of course, but we got the natural way. And I've been on 2 airplane flights since then, and without a mask, and haven't caught as much as a sniffle, because the combination of healthy immune system and the fortification of the antibodies that are lifelong lasting, most of them for when you acquire the disease, like chickenpox or anything else. So the whole pandemic is another whole topic. And how would an emotive, soulful paradigm, how would it deconstruct what happened to this planet? And I mean this planet, by this COVID nonsense that kills 0.5% of the population. And yet we wrecked the whole, put a hole in the whole world economy for something that kills 0.5% of the.
But we also sold a lot of vaccines that were not actually vaccines.
No.
A vaccine means it prevents you from getting the thing, and they didn't do that. But we still call them vaccines, which is very confusing to me.
Well, that was part of the sleight of hand. Let's save all that juicy bullshit that they fed us about COVID. We're not right-wing people over here, conspiracists. We're not. We're right in the middle between left and right on everything. But in the COVID sense, we're definitely right of center. Relative, we were astonished to find ourselves agreeing about 1/3 of the time with rabid right wingers about it for all for different reasons. But at the end, agreed with the behaviors here. It was all overblown. But we'll save that for next time.
Otherwise,
Let's
we'll
do
get too
that.
excited about ranting about that.
Yeah, we'll have a rant fest next time.
So we covered Kundalini, Diksha, Shakti stuff of all kinds. I guess that pretty much exhausts that for now, at least.
It does. And just to remind everyone that, again, everything we said about shamanism, which, as we said last time, is taking the world by storm in some way, in both plant-based psychedelics, like we talked about last time a lot, and all the way down to energetic transplants and grafts. Both in helping you be not get drunk or win or lose board games. This whole thing of shamanism, it's part of sainthood, and we have to learn how to manage and soulify that whole paradigm of shamanism, and that we do that as a sub bandwidth of sainthood in Edenity. So yeah.
Well, thank you, Stace, and thank you, listeners, for listening and or watching. Of course, we're on YouTube, as hopefully everybody knows by now. Mm-hmm. And tune in next time. We'll start going into current events, beginning with the pandemic. We can talk about the pandemic now that it's over, right? And, that's what you do. The thing ends, and then you talk about it.
Yeah, exactly right.
And we can talk about Trump and the upcoming presidential race, because we're getting ready for that. Beginning
you betcha.
November, people are declaring Biden is running again. Very exciting. Round 2 of Trump and Biden. Beginning a new season of the Trump show. I've seen the whole Trump thing as a TV series. He announces and then the season ends, or he wins and that was the beginning of a new season. And
Right, exactly. Well, he just got the. We'll talk about the next time. He just lost the
civil suit. Yeah.
Right, civil suit. So the dominoes are going to start to fall, and it just depends on how much the group or the guild of what did I say GOP stands for now? The guild
I forget that one.
I forget. It depends on how self-destructive they are, that they want to go with Trump as a nominee again, even though he's got a passel of looming suits and investigations against him.
How about goofy oligarchical politicians?
Oh, that's fine. Well, the far right in that sense, they can't tell the difference between democracy and fascism. It's really interesting. It really is interesting. 40% of the people and 80% in the grand old party, as it used to be stand for, can't tell the difference between democracy and fascism. Mm-hmm. Boy, that's a tough one too for my brain to process. So we'll talk about that next time too.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you, Stace. Right. Thank you, listeners. Until next time, wish you well on your journey. Thanks for listening to the Heart of Soul podcast. To learn more about Stace Barron and Edenity, please visit edenity.org. To learn more about Joseph Shapiro, visit clearandopen.com. Until next time, we wish you well on your journey.